You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. If you're a man and your life is lacking real purpose and meaning, you may not know what it is, but you feel deep down you're here for something more, something bigger, bolder, heartfelt, and soul-led. You lack the deep intimacy, love, and sex that your heart craves without the confidence and know-how to create it. You're struggling with the burden of life and feeling trapped by the lack of freedom. If you're feeling isolated, lonely, and lacking the support and mentorship of men who really get you, and this only grows with each year that passes. If you resonated with any of those, then honestly, we really hear you. You're not alone. We see this over and over in the men around us, and that's what led us to create Waking the Wild Masculine. It's a potent circle led by Jonathan, which supports you in discovering your soul path and expressing your heart's truth while being fully seen and held by a circle of your fellow men. It really is the most powerful activating magic we know of. You can let us know you're feeling the call by going along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM. And if you want to book a call with Jonathan to discuss that further, you can do so there. Now, onto this week's show. It's with my fourth-time guest, the amazing James Tripp, an internationally recognised and respected educator, consultant, and coach in the fields of personal transformation, hypnosis, influential communication, and personal efficacy. Working from an eclectic background, including philosophy, music, mentalism, martial arts, movement culture, and NLP, James is also the developer of the critically acclaimed Hypnosis Without Trance approach to hypnosis. Beyond his work with private clients, James runs open workshops internationally with his London and UK-based workshops typically drawing students from around the world. In today's show, we spoke about something that is very much alive for both of us, which we didn't actually know that ahead of time. You could call it working with magic or non-linear ways of being. And this is a way of living in which we co-create with a complex world around us, knowing we can't control how things unfold and yet still creating towards a vision or intention. Even the fact that this was the topic of the show and then the way the conversation unfolded was a perfect example of that. We really didn't know that was the topic until we were literally recording. As ever, this show with James was so timely for me. It's something weird. There's some kind of magic that gets created when James and I record a show where it always is perfect in terms of like where I am in that moment. So I don't know if that works for you too. I hope it does. But ultimately, it just went super, super deep. I loved recording it with him. And I really hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we did co-creating it. Let's dive in. Hello, James. Welcome back for the, I don't even know, third, fourth however many times to the show.
Something
You were
like
definitely
that,
in a rarefied few, and I've actually lost track, but welcome back anyway.
Well, thank you very much. It's fantastic to be back on the podcast.
And it's a bit meta because we're just chatting about your grogginess and experience of insomnia and kind of declaration around non-linearity, which I think this episode is going to be an example of all those things.
Yes. It's like, to me, this year, 2020, is the year of true non-linearity. So I'm much more looking to work with whatever comes up, to truly embrace whatever comes up and allow from that interesting things to emerge. So I'm very happy to do that within the context of this podcast.
Yeah, which I always dig. I mean, in a way, that is the nature of the show, is so much, like seeing what wants to be created in the moment or co-created in the moment. So I dig that.
Cool.
I'm trying to think where best to start. So there's a couple of places that are tugging at my attention. First of all, for you to just share some of the experiences you've been having with insomnia. But then there's also, I'm wondering at the outset, maybe it's better, let me know what you're feeling, to kind of define what you mean by non-linearity, because I think you're probably going to refer to that a number of times. It might be an idea just to kind of get that out there at the outset so you don't then have to do that mid-explanation, if that makes sense.
Okay, and I suspect that I'm using this term a little bit poetically rather than scientifically. It's a term that comes from complex systems dynamics. And to take it out of that realm where people might go, oh, complex system dynamics, it's really just looking at the interconnected nature of everything. And when everything is interconnected in a more web-like way, you have influences coming from all angles. And this is what I mean by non-linearity. A lot of the time when we are, the way we're raised, the way we're taught at school is to move towards outcomes in a very linear way. To say, right, that's what I want. And what do I then need to do in order to get there? Mm-hmm. I need to do this, then this, then this, then this. This is a very, very linear thing. That isn't really how the world works. It isn't really how life works. If you look at a rainforest, nobody said, right, I'm going to build a rainforest. I need to put it in this order. These things kind of emerge across time through a series of complex interactions. And life is very much like this. So I'm a big fan of the Steve Jobs quote. You cannot connect the dots looking forward, only looking backward.
That's probably one of my most quoted quotes too.
Right.
I'm really with you on that.
So I've loved this quote for years, and I've really been enamored of the idea of dancing with reality, participating in the unfolding, creating with what comes up, co-creating with the world around. And I've been in love with this idea for years. And to some degree, to a large degree, it's been quite intellectual. I thought I've been living it. I really have thought I've been living it. But what I've discovered of late, and what actually helped me discover this, was a bout of insomnia that you mentioned. Helped me discover how much unconsciously, outside of consciousness, I was still clinging on to linearity, still clinging on to trying to micromanage how the chips fall in life, instead of allowing the chips to fall where they may, but still being in my power to co-create with how those chips fall. So I've kind of had a number of experiences that have shone a spotlight on the fact that I haven't truly been living what I would be intellectually espousing, so to speak.
Yes.
And I think that the system that I am a part of, that I am or whatever, maybe kick this into my line of sight through some debilitating insomnia. So the insomnia has helped me out in a way that I would never have anticipated, because you cannot connect the dots looking forward, only looking backward. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So I just want to, a couple of things just come up for me. And I think we are, as I said, I feel like there's always a reason why you and I end up recording a show. And it always feels really timely for me. Like I'm ready to see something from a different perspective, or I'm kind of just ready for an opening. And there's something about the way that you and I explore things that kind of creates that for me. And it's really interesting because so much what you're saying, I've been exploring, but using really different words or models, but it's much the same thing. And I love everything you've just said. And it brought to mind a book I've just finished. It's called something like Natural Laws of Success or Natural Laws of Success. Not particularly nice name, but the book's brilliant. And there's a page here that I'm just going to read a quick quote of that. I'd be interested just to get your take on this, because this, I think, is what I'm really seeing is this sweet spot in between two models that we typically, like as a culture, we tend to adopt one or the other. So generally, and let me repeat, generally, Eastern modalities advocate being, overdoing, and averse to wanting things because desire, as they see it, creates suffering. Western modalities are the opposite in that they tend to advocate relentless striving facilitated by the willful denial of practical circumstances and emotional realities. While the former promotes a passive acceptance of the status quo in return for an absence of inner conflict, the latter regards the sacrifice of truth and inner harmony as acceptable casualties of achievement and material reward. It goes on, but it's really, I don't know how clearly that particular quote I read spoke about it, but that's what I'm really seeing. There's this way of being, and I think, a lot of the sort of non-duality kind of ways of talking about things are having no sense of a kind of like wanting to put our desire into the world, wanting to move towards something. And so there is it's quite easy to be when there is no sense of moving towards something. And then you can measure the gap between where you are and where you're moving towards, versus when it was talking about Western modalities, it was talking about things like, for example, positive thinking and like kind of like law of attraction. You're really driving towards a goal and then like dismissing anything that comes up to the contrary. And I love the way it was talking about there is a way of being where we're allowing all of that complexity and co-creation of like the moment. And so we're not trying to figure out the how, because it's kind of like, it's pointless trying to figure out the how because we're never going to know what's going to be created in the moment. But allowing us to honor that, what you could call our kind of soul's path or our desire to create. So not being so directionless, having a sense of like, yes, I do want to go in this direction, but the how is going to be created moment to moment.
Yeah, that's really, excuse me, that's really interesting to me because I'm a big fan of creating in the world, but I'm aware that I don't get to control the world. So the question is, how do you influence in a world that you cannot control? Should you influence? And I think this idea of wanting to create outcomes, because there's a distinction here, which in different languages, the distinction of magic versus mysticism. Magic is about actually making differences in the world, whereas mysticism is about deepening one's connection with things and more about a spiritual path and not trying to make things happen. And you do get this perspective that it's unhealthy to somehow be trying to make things happen. But I also think that Wallace Wattles in The Science of Getting Rich has a point where he says, it is a mark of life to want to grow, to sort of become more. This is almost like a signature of all life. And even if you look at life in the simplest terms, single cell organisms, they move towards certain things and away from others.
Yes.
Even on that most basic level. So I think there's definitely something in the nature of life, in the nature of being, in the nature of evolution, perhaps itself. I know not everybody is on board with the kind of whole evolution thing, but there seems to be a movement in the mix happening and unfolding. And to me, I don't want to deny that. It's definitely a part of who I am and how I am. I'm also aware that I can get bent out of shape by it. And there's this question of, well, how do you create results? Particularly, how do you create results in a rich, complex system of interdependent elements and all this kind of craziness? And how do outcomes fit with that? Because it's very easy to hold too tightly to an outcome and get bent out of shape by it. So I've spent a number of years trying to figure out the role of outcomes versus the role of just engaging and seeing what happens. Because that's one, even from the creation side of things. So you were talking about the sort of being path where you're not trying to achieve anything. But even on the doing side of things, you can participate and let things emerge, like truly have no forward vision. And just go, wow, look, interesting things happen. That's great. Or you can utilize this intentionality that we seem to have. And that seems to me, this utilization of intentionality, this seems to me to be a real craft in how to do this.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It seems simple. Oh, well, you know what you want. You plot some steps towards it. But that almost never works. This is why in project management, you'll find almost all projects go over time and over budget. And those that don't, usually because unforeseen variables assisted the project moving forward rather than the project plan was perfect. So you've got this kind of thing going on. And there's a question of, well, how do I work with my desire? How do I work with my intentionality? How do I work with these sorts of things without becoming a victim to them, without becoming trapped, suffocated, stifled, and precluding novelty from emerging as well.
Yeah. And can I just add in there? It's so funny how this is exactly what's been going on for me at the same time as you. And even though we were using entirely different words, so I had no clue that's what you were talking about. It turns out it was exactly the same thing. I love that. But anyway, I think what I'm increasingly seeing the power of, and I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this. If we both are talking about this idea of like, yes, actually allowing a space for desire, intentionality, as in a kind of a direction of travel, knowing there's that real value in being open to the kind of co-creation of the moment, what's coming forth, and also seeing how much that includes what's coming in from, and whatever word you want to give this, ideas, inspiration, intuition. That is, I'm increasingly seeing like, wow, the more I let go of the how, but still empower that sense of intention, the more I'm open to these like completely random ideas that I probably never would have got to logically through trying to figure out the steps.
Right. And that makes complete sense to me, because if you look at it from the lens of complex adaptive systems, the study of complex adaptive systems, which is anything like a rainforest or life on Earth, or even like neural nets they're now creating for artificial intelligence and these sorts of things. One of the things you find within these systems is you find a lot of redundancy. They're massively inefficient systems. They do all manner of things and go off in different directions and make lots of mistakes. Very inefficient. But they generate huge amounts of novelty. So there seems to be a relationship between inefficiency or randomness, or a certain degree of allowing all sorts of stuff to happen, and the generation of novelty. And whereas if you look at efficient linear systems, even when they work well, like a watch, for example, is complicated. It's a complex thing, but it's very linear. It's it works well. It doesn't create a lot of novelty. It just does a very specific thing. So the curious thing about this is we're almost trained as we go through school to be more like a watch,
yes,
a machine. And we're told that in order to make things happen in the world, you have to do it efficiently and you have to do it linearly, and all the pieces have to move in a certain sequence and a certain order, and then you get this outcome. This is what we're taught. And we strive to do it. And I see people, because I coach people, and I see people thinking there's something wrong with them because they are inefficient, or because they're procrastinating, or because they're doing other things that are not getting on with their work. And they've been conditioned to think that this is a defect. But actually, it's a very unnatural way for human beings to engage, very unnatural. And you've got this really weird situation where in the world of artificial intelligence, or the cutting edge of computer technology, what they're doing is they're trying to make machines more lifelike. So they're building in this complexity, they're building in this redundancy so they can actually be adaptive and create novelty like life does.
Wow.
But what we're doing most of the time with regular school and this kind of thing, and a lot of the paradigms that are out there in terms of time management and stuff, we're doing the opposite. We're trying to take out...
Wow, we are.
We're mechanizing ourselves, becoming linear, right? How crazy is that?
Yeah. Wow, that's really, I hadn't realized that. And that makes so much sense. It reminds me actually of an article that really hit me a few years back. And it was talking about, I'm sure you know this already, but it's talking about how over various eras, we've assumed or kind of used the metaphor of the current technology as a kind of explaining how our brains work. So if it was kind of in the, I don't know if you call it hydraulics, but in the kind of in that era, we would explain the brain like that. And then in the sort of when we were kind of all about mechanics, we would explain it like that. And now currently we're using the idea of a computer to explain how the brain works, but not the complex adaptive computers that you're talking about in terms of artificial intelligence, but the kind of ones that are literally, they work like this. You kind of code in, code out, it works like this. Rather than recognizing it for that complex ecosystem, it actually is. And I hadn't thought about that for quite some time, but that's such an interesting thing. Like our very understanding of how our minds work are limiting how we're allowing it to work.
I think that's definitely true. And I think there are, with the computer metaphor, most computer programs, they are aiming for efficiency, not novelty. They're not trying to create novelty.
Yes, like the last thing on is novelty.
Right. So you want this thing to do this specific thing in this specific way every single time. But in the world of AI, where they're looking at building learning systems and they're building systems that could solve problems and do these sorts of things, they're having to throw out all of those ideas, these ideas of like a top-down command and control system that designates absolutely how every moving part is going to work. And to, as soon as they want to create something that can learn, grow, adapt, produce novelty, it has to work in a completely different way, from a completely different set of paradigms. And it has a lot of redundancy in the system. And the important thing is you've got all these elements in. It's important to have diversity in the system. It's important to have interconnectedness in the system. It's important to have adaptiveness in the system. And you get these systems that are generative of high levels of novelty, incredibly resilient, because like a watch, a linear system is not resilient. You break, one of the gears in it, it doesn't work. A regular computer program is not resilient. You get a bug in the code, the whole thing crashes because there's no redundancy in the system. So I think this is like a really, really important thing. And if you look around you, it is how everything around us, whatever people's view of civilization, of technology, of where we're at, all that has been created through these non-linear dynamics, not through the linear dynamics. And what you often see, if you start to look in the world of business, is you see a lot of businesses when they're taken over by venture capital firms who increase efficiency measures. Those businesses end up not lasting so long. Like Boeing, for example, is in a lot of trouble at the moment. It used to be run by creative engineers who are interested in exploring what's possible. Now it's run by people that want to make the business as efficient as possible, and it's not working so well. So you start to lose the creativity the more you take out, the more linear you go, the more it starts to suffocate the system. The more it takes, it becomes less of an ecosystem.
Yeah, it only works if everything stays the same. And of course, nothing stays the same. And so you're almost programming it like it's going to be an outcome of its very system that it at some point is going to fail because it's not built for adaptation. That's so, I love that when you think of it from a business perspective. What comes to mind is, and I think this is probably more our culture than human nature is occurring to me. I mean, so what I was about to say is there is this very kind of like, even if we have that intention of creating in the way that we're talking about, to have like honoring our desire intentionality and being open to that kind of how the how gets co-created. I was thinking, and I can speak for myself here. I have this very human tendency to then kind of latch onto like, oh, that's the how. I've had this brilliant idea, that becomes the how, or this happens, so that becomes the how. And so I would love to explore that with you in a moment. But I was just thinking, it's interesting how I've said that's a very human tendency, and I don't think it is. Like if you look at studies that have been done on humans that are still living in indigenous ways, I think they are very aware that like they are part of an ecosystem and not doing that kind of like, we need to figure out the how and it needs to be this way. I don't think that is a human thing. I think that's a cultural thing. So I just want to say that first, but I'd love to know what you think about this way that even with that kind of intention to work in this kind of magical co-creational way, we then jump into thinking, all right, that's it. I've got the how. I'm now going to move forward in actually a really linear fashion, even if the how was co-created.
Yeah. I think, I do really think it's conditioned in. We go through school and the mainstream education system, certainly here in the UK, really is about the how of things. Yes. How do you get this done? There's a lot of how provided. You're going to be here at this time and you're going to do this and you're going to wear these things. And it's all very rigid and very specific. I think, and I do think it's a bit there in human nature. I think probably almost anything in culture is there to some degree in human nature.
Yes,
but
good point.
The culture's got to blow it out of proportion and emphasize this. Maybe you've got these two things here and this gets emphasized and that gets pushed right down. So I do think probably, in our more indigenous states, we probably occasionally go, wonder how I might do that. All right, yeah. That kind of how. More like a micro how. You look at it from this angle, look at it from that angle and go, yeah, I think I'll do it like that. Which is different from, because that's the how. How do I do that? Applied to something quite simple. How do I get that apple down from the tree? It's a different prospect from how do I build that business, that multinational corporation,
complex,
or how
massive, totally,
right. And this is a huge thing. I think, like understanding complexity. Now, in a sense, life is complex. All the interactions within our body, the second messenger systems, the cellular communication, all of this kind of thing, richly complex. Our brains, richly complex. Phenomenal number of neuronal connections, and we have no idea what most of it's doing. So we've got this level of complexity, and then we might be living there in the wilderness, hunting and gathering, and we're living in a complex system there. The complexity is not a digital state. It's complex or it's not. You get degrees of complexity and you get increasing complexity. And what we've done as human beings is we've created richer systems, i.e. cultures, economies, societies, institutions, all of these things. They become agents themselves. There's more interconnection. We've got technology that interconnects. You've got increasing complexity. And what people miss is none of this is natural. We are left to engage with unnatural levels of complexity. And so when sometimes I'm working with people and they say, well, I procrastinate, I'm not getting things done, and they think there's something wrong with them, I point out that everything they're trying to do is unnatural. It's unnatural stuff. You evolved to figure out how to get apples down off a tree, maybe build some shelter when you needed it and do some other things. And you're trying to do this really, really unnatural stuff. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying respect the fact that it's unnatural and it's really complex. So cut yourself some slack and go, right, I'm dealing with complexity here. I need to create this crazy complexity. And then the way that we get taught to manage the increasing complexity is with increasing linearity. It doesn't make sense. And it's become more and more redundant across time. So I think the ability for us to be at ease with complexity rather than freaked out by it and thinking there's something wrong with it. I think the first step to creating this complexity is to be at ease with it and go, Let's not deny it. Let's say, yeah, it's messy, right? We cannot predict what's going to happen next. I often say to clients, I say, when was the last time a single day of your life went as predicted? Right?
Yeah.
Just one day, right? Went exactly as planned. And of course, some people might go, well, the last Thursday was reasonably maybe. But when did you last manage to predict even a single day?
Oh, I love that. Let alone when you are up for creating, I was about to say, it really is anything. But, if you're someone who really wants to be creating in the world, like, yeah, I don't think any of my days go to plan.
Right. And like, look, we're having this conversation. Did we plan this conversation? I suppose to a certain degree. But here's an interesting thing. I'm very interested in the nonlinearity of creation. So we are having this conversation right now because of a photograph that I put on Instagram, which was the screen grab of a conversation I had in a private Facebook group. Right. And where somebody had said something to me and I'd responded and I thought that it was worth sharing. I could trace this now this is, you cannot connect the dots looking forward, only looking back. Mm-hmm. Looking back, I can say these events led to us having this conversation right now. But ahead of time, I couldn't predict that. If I'd have said, I want to get on Leanne's podcast, how shall I go about that? You see, I couldn't have done that. So for me, this, things that I do this thing I call nonlinear generative engagement. And I constantly want to create with what comes up. So I'm actually here having this conversation with you, at least in part, because I created with what came up, not because I tried to manage this linearly. I like to look and go, what's coming at me? In this instance, there was a guy on a Facebook group challenging me, saying that, that I should be, basically he was shooting at me covertly, saying I should be teaching simpler stuff than I am, and that people would get confused. And
bless those people.
Right, and maybe they will. That's absolutely fine.
Yes.
I'm totally cool with people being confused, because I'm not trying to claim that I have the right solutions for everybody. I just got the stuff that's coming through me, and I may as well turn the tap on and let that flood out. But I do this thing where I go, this has just been given to me. If this is a gift from the universe, from the world around me, what do I do with this that's generative? Now, I've got some loose goals and outcomes, things that I want to bring into my life. And the way I think about creating my life these days is I do think of it in terms of ecosystems. So instead of thinking my job is to create this outcome or that outcome, I think, what's the ecosystem of my life that I'm looking to generate? What kinds of features do I want to see in the ecosystem of my life? So I'll pursue these things, and I look and I think of everything that comes my way, and how could I create with this? It's like I used to do improv theatre, and the basic idea in improv theatre is never block an offer. You get given something, create something with it. It might be good, it might not be good, but create something with it. So I will create with whatever comes my way. And I will often do things like this. I made a video the other day, which was also based on a conversation on Facebook. But what I did is I put my screen capture on. I went down the thing and I unpacked the conversation for a video, which then gets used somewhere else. So these things kind of fold into each other. So literally sometimes I'm going, how do I create with this? How do I create with this? Now it's a micro how. Again, it's not a macro how. It's not a how am I going to get to this goal at some point in the future. It's how am I going to do something with this right now, or what could I do with this right now, and just getting on and doing something with it. But it has a direction to it. To come back to what we were saying before, it's not just, I just go with the flow. It's got a directionality to it, but it's not tightly held.
Yeah.
So it's not so tightly held that it binds me. It just gives a direction. I know the kind of ecology that I want to grow in my life. So that informs me as to what I do with what comes up and what comes my way.
I love that. So being mindful of time, because there's so much, like, I'm loving this conversation. There's so much gold here. So there's two things I think would be really helpful to speak about. One, I think we probably need to wrap the insomnia back in somewhere, because we mentioned at the beginning and everyone's going to be like, well, what the hell did the insomnia have to do with any of this? So maybe end on that as maybe it'd be a good illustration of the things we're talking about. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
But first, what you've just said, I love. It's I think those micro hows, it's kind of how do we use whatever's coming up in the moment as an act of creation, and that there is going to be somehow involved in that in order to be able to kind of, work with it, alchemize it into something. An example has just come to mind of something that's just happened for me. I'm at the moment enrolling for my next Wake in the Wild Feminine Circle, and one of the women who'd been in a previous one jokingly said, "Oh, is there a limit on how many times women can join these circles?" Because she'd loved the last one so much, and kind of was joking, saying, could she join again? And then as she said it, I was like, wow, actually, that could be a really gorgeous thing if the women who had joined previous circles could join. That would require me to be able to, I would need to stretch my edges in terms of kind of what I'm creating with them, because I can't, I wouldn't want to use the same material. And what would that look like? So I've now gone back to all of the previous women and said, would you be interested in joining the next one? As it happens, some would. So it's a really great example of what you're talking about here. That absolutely wasn't my intention at the start. And it has been a kind of little micro house that are using what's being provided to me in the moment. So I'm loving kind of seeing how that actually happens, like a practical example of how that can work in real life. But I want to come back to that. We've talked about it as a kind of sense of direction, having a sense of the ecosystem you want to create, a desire, an intention. So I think what would be really helpful, and I'm sure it is kind of as listeners are hearing this, that wider how, not the wider how, but that wider direction. How do you create that? How do you have a sense of that intention, that desire that you're creating?
So when you say the wider direction, let me see if I'm understanding what you're saying. I think when people think of outcomes, there's an idea from NLP of the well-formed outcome. And it has to be, or even the SMART goal, right? Specific, measurable. It's all this detail. I actually think there's nothing wrong with doing that, so long as you do it and go, there's one possible version, right? That's fine. Okay? That's one way it could be. I think that can be useful to inform a person's neurology, so long as you don't then go, right, that's exactly what must be and anything else isn't it. I don't tend to go for SMART goals myself. I prefer, there's an old quote, interview with Errol Flynn, and somebody asked Errol Flynn in an interview, how do you hold a sword, for your swashbuckling scenes? He said, what's the correct way to hold a sword? He said, you must hold a sword. Probably didn't say it in such a sage way as this, but you hold a sword like you would hold a baby bird. Not so tight that you would crush the life out of it, but not so loose that it flies away. And I often think of holding outcomes like that, not so tight, but not so loose. So I tend to actually have kind of nebulous outcomes, loose outcomes that create a lot of capacity for how they might be got to or how they might be realized in the world. So instead of things that are specific and measurable and concrete and that kind of thing, like I have outcomes like I want to have a lot of diversity in my life. I want to have a certain, I don't have these fixed numbers, amount of money, but I want to have a certain amount of wealth flowing through. So that is a goal for me, wealth flow. Now somebody said, James, that's a bit nebulous. Wealth flow, it means something to me, not in a tight way that I could make a video of, but wealth flow, diversity, these are things. There are more qualities that I want to have in my life than specific outcomes. Now, because I have these qualities, they can be realized in a variety of different ways. I can also have an internal check for me as to whether something is aligned with one of those qualities or whether it's heading in a different direction. Like yeah, that feels. It's like, to bring this down to a micro level, I do a lot of creative stuff. I used to write music, and write music isn't the correct thing. I used to allow music to emerge from activities that I did. And I do a lot of video editing now. So I spent the other day, a whole day went on editing one video. And somebody said to me, well, it's like that when you're creative. You have a vision and then you get into it. And I thought, that's not true. I don't have a vision. I get into it and I have an internal check that says, yeah, that works, or no, not so much. And I'm running on this internal check. I go, oh, that works, yeah. And then when I do something that works, it suggests something else to me. I go, well, actually, now I've got that. I could do that, that, and that. Oh, yeah. And then I do the next thing. So it's not really I have a vision. It's that I just do something. I have a check that says, yeah, that's good. It moves me towards some nebulous thing called goodness or some aesthetic quality. And I head in that direction, but I build it incrementally from the bottom up. So by having a more nebulous sort of outcome, it's more like water, right? Rainwater will find its way to the ocean possibly at some point, but by which channel, you don't know. The ocean is the goal. The rain's coming in. Is it going to go this way or that way, or which direction it's going to co-create with the landscape, its journey to the sea. So that's kind of like, that's the best description. There's some people out there who go, but James, that's not very specific. It's not a very specific thing in a way. It's more like it comes back to the idea of being again. It's more of a way of being.
Yes.
Or a way of participating with the world around that allows my intentionality to come in a way that gives direction, but without stifling things, without shutting down possibility.
That makes so much sense. Oh my goodness. There's so many different things I want to bring into this. We're running out of time. We might have to come back to part 2. So a couple of things came up for me. One is I've increasingly seen the what would be a good way of I would use the word kind of rewilding, but you could call it deconditioning of our minds and bodies so that we're able to feel that. We have a sensitivity to feel whether something's aligned, feel whether something feels good. And, that's a lot of the work I'm doing with women in Wake the Wild Feminine, is to get that sense of like our internal compass rather than it being that kind of external kind of like what we should be doing, looking like, behaving like, whatever it might be. So that just came to mind. And then there's that, going back to that wider word you could use is vision, I suppose, of the kind of life that you'd like to create that has things like a flow of wealth, diversity. How do you come up with that?
So for me, this is about an evolution. It's not about a decision. And I think a lot of the time when people are going, well, what do I want? What goals? They're looking to make a decision about what they want in their life or what they want to create in their life. Sometimes people say, how do I know what I really want? Like there's something called I really want to be discovered. And some people move on to this point of going, well, I need to make a decision about what I want. As if this decision once made is now etched in stone. And for me, what I want to shape up and create in my life has just evolved across time. It's okay for me to not have one definitive final version and to allow for it to shift and change. But to have it grow, not change direction all the time, but grow. That's the important thing. I had some ideas about what I wanted from my life many years ago. And then perhaps I realized deeper that some of those ideas weren't the ocean. They were choosing a particular course to the ocean. And so across time, something more and more kind of clear, but it's not clear. It's deliberately not clear, strategically not clear, but it has an essence to it. And this has emerged. And again, you were talking about this idea of being able to kind of check in with yourself and have these signals around congruence. And is that right? So what I've created in terms of my vision, my nebulous vision, it's more of a felt vision than a visual vision in a sense, is is a product of testing and feeling the rightness of it and what needs to change in it or what could change in it, those sorts of things. So it really is the end of a long process that I'm continually revisiting. You know, where am I at right now? What's good? What's working? What do I like? Where am I getting caught? Yeah, and really kind of feeling in and becoming more and more sensitive to things, which perhaps like ties in with that insomnia thing. I don't know.
Thank you, James. So now can you tie it up really neatly with the story about the insomnia, please?
Okay, so to keep this brief, sleep had always been an issue for me for my entire life, not being able to sleep well, not sleeping deeply, not sleeping heavily. A couple of years ago, probably it was about 2 years ago, I was in a training with somebody called Lisa Schwartz, who teaches a method for working with post-traumatic stress disorder that I was learning from her at the time. And I happened to mention casually, here's an example of how you can't predict things. I mentioned casually that I'd kind of, during one of the group exercises, I'd zoned out a bit. And I said, but you know, I didn't sleep well because I'm still adjusting from coming back from California. And I just threw away line. I said, and I never sleep well anyway. And it was a throwaway line. And she said to me, oh, would you like to do something about that? And I said, well, yes, if we can do something about that. Yeah, sure. I said, I'm not sure that there's anything you can do. I think I just don't sleep that well. And then her assistant said to me, what does that even mean? I just don't sleep that well. And I thought, well, that's a good question. Anyway, I volunteered to have this bit of work done, which was semi-hypnotic, though she doesn't describe herself as a hypnotist. And I ended up going into this kind of regressed place, which I hadn't predicted I was going to end up in. And I'm not a big into that kind of regression stuff. And she did this piece of work with me. Anyway, what happened is that was in the morning. By the afternoon break, I felt really, really absolutely drained and shattered and exhausted. So much so, I just left the afternoon break. And I went home and I went to bed, which is something I never do. And I fell asleep and I slept through the rest of the afternoon, the whole evening, the night, all the way into the morning.
Wow.
Without waking up. Just this must have been, I don't know, maybe sort of 18 hours of sleep or something.
Goodness.
Never would I sleep like that. And I was stunned by this. And I went into the training the next day. They said, oh, you're all right. You disappeared. I said, I'm fine. Then for the next 2 weeks, almost any time I sat down, I fell asleep. I fell asleep in a cinema. I went in to watch a movie. I was out. I was gone for the whole film. I got on a plane. I never slept on planes before that point. I got on a plane, made a few notes about what I was going to do when I arrived. I think I was heading to Brazil, and then just went out like a light until we landed. Never happened before. So my sleep for 2 weeks was crazy. I was falling asleep everywhere, and then it normalized, and I was just sleeping well at night. And I thought, this is amazing. For the first time in my life, where I'm in my 40s, I'm sleeping well. And everything was fine until October this year. And I had my friend James Tripp over. He ran a training. We did the training. Once he left, I thought, right, now I need to get back on with getting this project launched. And 3 days afterwards, I went to bed, lay awake all night, didn't sleep, not a wink. There was nothing apparently on my mind. Couldn't notice anything on my mind, no rumination, no thoughts going around. It seemed that my mind was quiet. I was just lying there. I thought, never mind, I'll sleep well tonight because I haven't had any sleep. Same story again. Completely no sleep all night. I'm thinking, what is going on here? Anyway, I had made an adjustment in my diet. I thought maybe this was it. I started to try and remedy it in a variety of different ways. Started swimming every evening and changed my diet and was getting up in the morning in the sunlight and all sorts of stuff. It kind of improved a bit. But I started to think to myself, what's going on here? I can't pick this. And one of the things I recognized is sleep is often the more problem. It's one of these things, insomnia is the more problem. The more desperate I am for it, the more the more I need it. And it really was kind of kicking me out of sorts. I couldn't make videos because I was just this groggy mess with no short-term memory. So it seemed important that I got sleep. So I knew I would have to do something about this. So I decided that if I wasn't going to sleep, I was going to get up and write. I'd just do something useful with the time, even if the writing was useless. And I wasn't really getting anywhere, but I decided I would just kind of let it be. But what it had me kind of do was I got some coaching sessions from some different people around it, and something emerged from it was that I had this deep fear. And it's a fear that I've had for years. And it's a fear that I thought I kind of got past. And it's the fear of loss. It's a fear of what if I lose everything? Now, I still don't know this, but I think this fear was under the surface. But I mean, really under the surface. I was not thinking consciously in any way that I might lose things or something might go wrong. I think what's happening is that I was about to dive into a project which unconsciously I'm perceiving as a make or break project for me. It's not a make or break project, but unconsciously I'm perceiving it as such. And I'm trying to make sure it goes right. Like, bad things will happen if it doesn't go right, if it's not exactly as it needs to be. And then unconsciously, my brain's getting into a loop. And I emphasize this unconsciously because there's no story I'm consciously buying into. It just isn't there. I had to do some deep archaeology to uncover this. And even now, I don't know if it's the truth. It seems like it could be a good fit with things. But it had me realize the degree to which I was holding on, the degree to which I was caught in this idea of the more success I get in what I do, the greater the fear of loss, the more there is to lose. And I started recognizing where it's showing up across my work. So last year, my video making, I got more and more controlling over the editing. There's stuff that I just wouldn't let go in the edit anymore that I used to let go and I used to be fine. So become less free and easy whilst consciously espousing ideas about non-linearity and creating and allowing mistakes and errors. And unconsciously, and it really was unconscious, I was becoming more and more controlling. And I feel that I was becoming more controlling because of this fear of loss. And I want to emphasize, I used to have a lot of fear and anxiety. There was conscious rumination attached to it and physical feelings of anxiety. I did a lot of self-development work across the years, and all of that's gone. But the thing that was interesting to me is even though it's gone in the way I used to know it, somewhere else it's still hiding in the gaps.
Yeah, amazing.
And coming through somehow. So what that had me recognize is like, well, I'm really holding on here and it's time. This is not working out for me. This holding on is not working out for me. So it's time to kind of relax even more into just letting the chips fall where they may. And that was a big shift. And this is the way I put it. I need to let the chips fall where they may instead of trying to micromanage where the chips fall. So that's the thing is recognizing that the strategy of unconsciously trying to micromanage everything just is not working. The result is worse than, but basically it's coming to the point of going, do you know what? Whatever happens, I'm going to create with what comes up. I remember Steve Chandler when he was my coach many years ago. He said so much to me that resonated and made sense. And it was so powerful. There was one thing he said to me that I could never quite align with. And he used to say, the universe is your friend. And intellectually, he helped me understand what I meant by that, but I never felt it. But it was only this year, the end of last year, because this insomnia phase lasted about 6 weeks, that I realized that I actually didn't believe the universe was my friend. And that I actually, on some level, was perceiving the universe as a hostile place. In spite of all that I thought that I believed, unconsciously, I was still seeing the universe as a hostile place that contained threats to me. And that was bringing a deep unconscious fear in. So that really helped. The insomnia brought this to light. It's like, my goodness, look what I'm doing underneath the surface. I'm afraid. I thought that I'd transcended all my fears, but there's still this deeper one that's subtle in some ways, in that there's no sensation or thoughts with it that I can pick up, but powerful in another way, and that it's disrupting my sleep and doing all this kind of thing. So it's kind of the big shift for me this year is to go, well, that's not working out. That fear is undermining me. And what's the worst thing that's going to happen if I truly let go? And that was getting to that point of recognizing the worst thing that's going to happen is shit will happen and I'll have to deal with it, and that's it. And maybe, just maybe, everything will be all right, because it has been for the last however many billion years that life's been evolving on Earth. So, I'm not this special character. So things will roll, and they will continue to roll, and all will be well. And then, so that kind of happened at the same point. I got back into looking at my Taoist roots, which is where I come from, and got more connected to the non-linearity stuff, because that really is about letting go. Yeah, of course, you might have a guiding direction, but it's not about having neediness to make that direction happen. So I kind of connected back into that. And then that got me looking at the nature of complex systems and emergence again. And I had this real moment, and I know this is going to sound, there'll be probably people listening to this podcast to go, yeah, James, come on, like, welcome to the world, and welcome to the wake up. But I've kind of had mini waking up moments in my life quite a few times, but I had this big, it's not a waking up, this big sense of like, my goodness, I really don't exist. And really experiencing that I don't exist on one level, not I don't exist in totality. There is a me, but this me is nebulous and shifting and emerging from all of these kind of things, and is a construct, or an emergence on a construct. I don't know. And then that really is, and I know this is a cliche thing, but it really did, I think, dissolve a lot of that fear away. It's like, well, I'm not really here anyway. I know I'm speaking here, and there's a collection of things that make up the me that I might define, and there's some speaking going on and all that stuff. I'm not trying to deny that, but I guess the sense of self softened yet further, and that's enabled me to be freer. But I have to thank all of the insomnia for this. I have to thank the insomnia. The insomnia looked like a bad thing. It just did. It looked like, on a superficial reading, it can't be anything other than bad. But of course, it's turned out to be a real gift. And I did embrace it, and the possibility of it being a gift first off, and look into it as, what could this be giving me? And that's what had me look deeper and find perhaps it was a manifestation of these deeper kind of fears. So that's the big shift. And that's what's brought me back into this kind of non-linearity place. And it's enabled me to get back in touch with really creating from a place of inspiration and excitement, rather than the linearly trying to get certain things to happen, because I'm afraid that if I don't, bad things will happen, which I had snuck in around the side, under the radar, and started taking over the game, I think.
Wow. Well, I think the insomnia has been a gift to all of us then, because I guess we wouldn't have had this conversation if it hadn't been for that. And this has
probably not. Yeah.
Really, really wonderful to be able to have this conversation with you. It's really, again, I'm like so marveling at the perfection of the timing, and how I've been kind of exploring things over here. You've been exploring over things, and it's kind of like helped me again join a few dots backwards that have been incredibly helpful. So, James, thank you so much. This has been just gorgeous. If listeners would like to find out more about you and all the amazing things you're creating, and again, as you've been talking, you're always creating some amazing things out there, where's the best place to find you?
Okay, I'm going to just say social media, Facebook, YouTube. My YouTube channel is James Tripp Chaos Wave. I create a reasonable amount of video content for that, especially based upon the things that people ask. So I'm aware, I really appreciate this opportunity to come on here and talk about some stuff which is, for a lot of people, quite out there. And I'm aware that some of the things that we're talking about in this conversation are not necessarily easy for people to grasp. So, and they've not been easy for me to grasp, and I'm barely grasping them. So I'm not trying to claim to be enlightened. I'm trying to grasp things which are not easy to grasp. I would invite people to go on YouTube or find me on Facebook and ask any questions that they want to ask if they think, well, there's something in there, but I'm not quite getting it, because I'm aware that an understanding of these things, or whatever understanding there is that we create and develop, only can come about through conversation and interaction, really an ongoing engagement. So Facebook is a good place to find me, James Tripp on Facebook, or on YouTube, James Tripp Chaos Wave. And if you want to ask me any questions about anything that's happened in this podcast, I'm happy to create replies somehow.
Wonderful. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you for having me on yet again. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, how awesome was that? Wow. Almost all of us in this culture are raised to think and act as if the world can be understood, controlled, and systematized, including ourselves, when really it's deeply complex, beyond prediction, and we just can't control it in the linear ways we've convinced ourselves we can. The way of creating that James and I are exploring means being open to the moment-to-moment unfolding of the world, including our own intuition and insight, which means letting go of the bigger how, whilst also feeling into our own desires for a loosely held outcome or vision. And I adored the quote about holding a baby bird that James shared about that. The more we get to know ourselves, resensitize or rewild our minds and bodies, the more we're able to feel the rightness or the alignment of the micro hows and our vision. And recognizing too that it will likely evolve over time. So continuing to feel into it is part of living this way. So if you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, including the books that we mentioned, do hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 271. Oh, and just to say, the book I was quoting from is by an author called William Whitecloud. And I mentioned his other book on, was it last week's podcast? I think so. And he's agreed to come on the show soon. So yes, we'll be delving into even more of this in the next few weeks. And if you're feeling the call to Waken the Wild Masculine, go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM to let us know. There's only a few spaces each time. They're intentionally limited to make it a really powerful, intimate experience. So if you're feeling it's for you, take action now to be sure of your place. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device as soon as it's released. And if you want to give back, if you enjoy this show and you want to give back in some way, there's a couple of ways you could do that. Firstly, leave us a rating and review. It just delights me seeing what you write. So that's a personal way to thank me. Sorry, I just slapped my heart really loud if you heard a slapping noise. So yes, it just is a huge delight to me to read your reviews, but also obviously helps other people to know whether it's the show for them. So that's one way you can give back. The other way is just to share the show with your friends and family. If you think someone else might dig this kind of very eclectic kind of topics, share it with them. And I'm hugely grateful if you do so. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.